I'm Josh Ryan, licensed professional counselor, and this is Pause and Respond, the framework for emotional control, disciplined thinking, and better decisions under pressure. Now, have you ever changed your answer before you even said it out loud? Not because your opinion changed, not because your values changed, but because you suddenly realized someone might be disappointed. So you smiled, nodded, you said yes, you agreed. And before anyone else noticed, you quietly left yourself out of the conversation. That tiny moment happens every day, and most of us never even notice it. Maybe it wasn't saying yes. Maybe it wasn't apologizing when you hadn't really done anything wrong. Maybe it was changing your weekend plans because someone seemed disappointed. Maybe it was staying quiet because telling the truth felt too risky. Have you ever noticed how quickly another person's disappointment can begin shaping your decisions? Not because they're controlling you, but because something inside of you is trying to keep the relationship safe. Somewhere along the way, many of us quietly learned a lesson we never realized we were learning. And that's if they're disappointed, the relationship may be in danger. Because if you believe that, then disappointing someone doesn't simply feel uncomfortable. It feels unsafe. It feels like you're risking connection. And once disappointment begins feeling dangerous, keeping everyone happy quietly becomes your emotional job. Now, children are remarkable observers. Long before they understand relationships, they begin learning what keeps relationships emotionally safe. And some children discover achievement keeps the peace. Others discover helping keeps the peace. Some learn don't make waves. Others quietly discover never disappoint anyone. Those lessons rarely arrive as rules. They arrive as experiences, repeated often enough that they slowly transform into parts of our identity. And that's the difficult part. Children don't just learn behaviors, they learn what kind of person they need to become in order to belong. The child who keeps everyone smiling becomes the adult who can't tolerate conflict. The child who learned to smooth everything over becomes the spouse who always apologizes first. The child who became emotionally easy to love often becomes the adult who's terrified of disappointing anyone. Now, that's not because they're weak, it's because adaptation quietly became their personality. I've watched this happen over and over again in counseling. People agree to things they never wanted. They take on responsibilities they never had room for. They say yes, while their mind and heart is quietly saying no. Years later, they aren't exhausted because they kept saying yes. They're exhausted because somewhere along the way, their yes stopped being honest. And whenever honesty disappears, resentment quietly takes its place. And here's something I hope you'll think about today. Many people aren't actually trying to keep everyone happy. They're trying to keep approval from disappearing. Those are two very different things. Now, one is about kindness, and the second is about survival. If approval became the way you measured safety, of course someone else's disappointment feels enormous. Your nervous system believes much more than a mood is at stake. It believes that belonging is at stake. And when your identity becomes wrapped up around the good one, someone else's disappointment doesn't feel temporary. It feels personal. It doesn't sound like they're frustrated. It sounds like I've become someone who lets people down. And that's why saying no can feel so emotionally expensive. You're not just setting a boundary, you're confronting the fear that honesty might cost you connection. This is where I think we're confused on two different things: comfort and connection. Comfort asks, how do I keep everyone happy? Connection asks, how do we stay honest even when disappointment happens? Those two paths eventually separate. One protects comfort, the other protects trust. And healthy relationships always choose trust. Now, one of the biggest misunderstandings I see is believing that disappointment automatically means damage. It doesn't. Sometimes someone's disappointment simply means two honest people wanted two different things. That's not a relationship failure. That's simply just part of reality. Disappointment isn't always evidence that something has gone wrong. Sometimes it's simply the cost of finally being truthful with each other. Now imagine how many versions of yourself you've quietly abandoned over the years, simply because you were trying to avoid disappointing someone. Maybe it's the opinion you never shared, the boundary you never set, the dream that you quietly postponed, that rest or nap you never took, the truth you swallowed. Not because those things weren't important, but because someone else's disappointment felt more dangerous than your own silence. Now, that's an incredibly heavy way to live in any relationship. Here's the sentence I hope stays with you long after this episode. The healthiest relationships aren't the ones where no one is ever disappointed. They're the ones where disappointment no longer threatens connection. Sit with that. Because if it's true, then maybe the goal isn't making everyone happy. Maybe the goal is becoming secure enough to remain honest even when happiness isn't possible. Now, this episode isn't about becoming harder. It isn't about becoming selfish or caring less about others. It's about discovering something healthier. That love was never meant to be built on the absence of disappointment. Love is built on something much stronger. It's built on truth and trust, and the courage to remain connected without abandoning yourself. That leads us to the question we'll spend the rest of today's episode exploring. When did keeping everyone comfortable become more important than being honest? Because somewhere in that question is the beginning of emotional freedom. Have you ever noticed that disappointing someone can feel far bigger than the situation actually deserves? You say no to dinner, you decline a request, you respectfully disagree. You decide to spend the weekend resting instead of helping. Now, on the surface, nothing dramatic has occurred. No one has yelled, no relationship has ended, and yet your body reacts as though you've endangered something much bigger than the moment itself. Why? Why can one disappointed expression feel like you've put the entire relationship at risk? I think the answer begins much deeper than adulthood. Somewhere along the way, many of us quietly stopped asking, do I belong? And without even realizing it, we started asking a different question. And that question was, what do I need to do to keep belonging? And those are completely different questions. One assumes that belonging is secure. The other assumes belonging can be lost. And that single shift quietly changes the way a person lives. Children don't spend their early years trying to build identities. They aren't thinking about personality or boundaries or emotional health. They're simply trying to stay close to the people they need the most. Whatever protects connection slowly becomes personality. So if achievement protects it, they begin to achieve. If being helpful protects connection, they become helpful. If never disappointing anyone protects connection, they become very emotionally careful. Children don't consciously choose those patterns. They simply discover what seems to keep love close. And that's why I don't think most people are addicted to approval. I think they're trying to protect belonging. Approval simply became a strategy because somewhere along the way, approval and belonging became confused. Healthy love quietly says, you belong before you perform. Conditional love whispers, keep performing and maybe you'll keep belonging. That's one of the most important distinctions we're going to make today. I've asked clients a question over the years that often changes the direction of an entire session. What do you believe would happen if you disappointed them? Now, sometimes before they even answer, they begin crying. Not because of today's relationship, but because today's disappointment quietly woke up yesterday's fear. The fear that love could become distant, that approval could begin slipping away, that belonging might suddenly become uncertain. Those aren't just adult fears. They're often childhood conclusions, still living inside an adult nervous system. Here's something I've been thinking about for a long time. Many people quietly live inside what I call an emotional economy. In that economy, approval becomes currency. Performance becomes payment. And belonging becomes something you can earn. Now think about how exhausting that is in a daily routine. Imagine waking up every morning believing your place in the relationship has to be earned all over again, that you start from day one. Every conversation, every decision, every interaction, you're constantly asking, am I still doing enough? That doesn't represent peace. That represents survival. And I've watched people say yes to things that exhausted them, simply because saying no felt emotionally dangerous. Not practically dangerous, but relationally dangerous. They weren't afraid of the request, they were afraid of what the request might mean if they declined it. Thoughts like, will they think I'm selfish? Will they stop calling me? Will they still even need me? Notice how simple boundary became an identity question. Now, if this is your story, I want you to hear something. Nothing about this makes you weak. Nothing about this makes you broken. It makes you very deeply human. Your nervous system simply learned a lesson that once helped protect something precious. Connection, belonging, and love. And today we're not criticizing those lessons. We're gently teaching your nervous system something new. That belonging doesn't have to be earned every single day. One of the saddest realities I've seen in counseling is watching deeply compassionate people slowly disappear, all while trying to protect the relationships they love. Little by little, they stop asking, what do I need? They stop asking, what do I value? They stop asking, what is true for me? And that's because every question becomes, what will keep everyone else okay? And eventually, they don't just lose boundaries, They lose themselves. Approval can be earned, but belonging should never have to. Sit with that for a second. Because if you spent years confusing the two things, this realization may begin changing the way you see everything in your relationships. The healthiest identities are never built on being needed. They're built on knowing you remain worthy, even when someone is disappointed. And that's a completely different way of living, because now disappointment is no longer proof you've failed. It's often just evidence that two honest people wanted different things, and that healthy relationships are strong enough to survive that. Maybe emotional freedom begins the moment belonging stops feeling like something you have to earn. Think about how many decisions would change, how many conversations would change, how many relationships would change if you truly believed that love was strong enough to survive someone else's disappointment. Because healthy love isn't built on perfect approval. It's built on secure belonging. So if healthy love doesn't require constant approval, what does it actually look like? How do emotionally secure people remain deeply compassionate while allowing disappointment to exist? Because I think that's where many of us begin discovering something remarkable. That the goal was never keeping everyone happy. The goal has always been learning how to remain honest without believing honesty threatens belonging. One of the strangest things about emotional maturity is that the healthier you become, the more willing you become to disappoint people you love. Not because you care less, but because you're finally learning what love actually requires. And that sounds almost backwards at first. Most of us have spent years believing that love means keeping people comfortable, that love means something that smoothing things over, avoiding conflict, and making sure everyone is okay. But healthy love asks something much deeper than comfort. It asks for honesty. Love that requires pretending eventually becomes loneliness. Sit with that. Because many people spend years becoming easier to live with, or quietly becoming harder to know. From the outside, relationships may appear peaceful. Inside, someone has stopped telling the truth, usually about themselves. That's one of the hidden costs of always keeping everyone happy. You don't lose relationships at first, you lose authenticity. One small compromise at a time, one swallowed opinion, one unspoken boundary, one quiet yes that should have been a no. Eventually, you become so practiced at protecting everyone else's comfort that you stop recognizing your own voice. And when people finally tell you they love you, you quietly wonder, would they still love me if they knew the real me? And that is and will always be a very lonely question. I've watched people spend years becoming easier to live with while becoming harder to know. They became agreeable, dependable, flexible, always available, never disappointing. Everyone appreciated them, but very few people actually knew them. Because every time you abandon honesty, you quietly teach people to love a version of you that doesn't actually exist. That's heartbreaking. Not because anyone intended harm, but because the relationship slowly became connected to your performance instead of to your personhood. And this is where I think we have to separate two words that many of us have unknowingly treated as the same: and that's comfort and connection. Comfort asks, how do we avoid disappointment? Connection asks, how do we remain honest while we walk through disappointment together? Comfort protects the moment, while connection protects the relationship. And those are very different goals. One avoids instant tension. The other builds long-term trust. And healthy love always chooses trust. I've sat with couples who proudly told me, we never fight. And at first, that sounds beautiful until you keep listening. Eventually, one spouse quietly says, I stopped bringing things up years ago because I didn't want to upset them. And the other one looks surprised. I thought everything was fine. Years of silence often looks like years of peace until someone finally tells the truth. Because that wasn't really peace. That was fear wearing peaceful clothes. One of the strongest relationships I ever witnessed wasn't built because two people avoided disappointing one another. It was built because disappointment no longer frightened them. One person could say, that hurt. The other could hear it without collapsing. One person could say, I need something different. And the other person could stay present without becoming defensive. That's secure love. Not because disappointment disappeared, but because trust became stronger than the disappointment. And I think this is one of the biggest misunderstandings many of us carry. Our nervous system often treats disappointment as though it's rejection, but those are not the same thing. Someone can be disappointed and still stay. Someone can disagree with you and still deeply love you. Someone can wish you had chosen differently without withdrawing their heart from you. And that's something many nervous systems never had the opportunity to learn. But it's something they can learn now. The stronger your identity becomes, the less urgent you need everyone else's emotional comfort to confirm it. Well, think about that. When you know who you are, you no longer need every room to feel peaceful before you can breathe. You no longer need every relationship to approve of every decision you make. You become free to tell the truth without making someone else's emotional reaction responsible for your identity. That's emotional maturity. There's a grief in realizing how much of your life has been organized around avoiding disappointment. And that's real grief. Not because you regret loving people, but because you begin seeing how often you quietly disappeared while trying to protect everyone else's comfort. And it's okay to honor that. Don't shame it. That version of you was trying to preserve connection. It simply believed comfort was the only path to it. Now you know something different. All right? The people who truly love you don't need the edited version of you. They need the honest one. I'm going to say that again. The people who truly love you don't need the edited version of you. They need the honest one. Because that may be one of the most freeing truths we've talked about all season. Healthy love doesn't ask you to become smaller. It invites you to become more real. Maybe emotional maturity isn't learning how to avoid disappointing people. Maybe it's learning that disappointment no longer has the power to make you abandon yourself. Think about how different your life would become if you truly believed that. How many conversations would change? How many boundaries would become easier? How many relationships would become more honest? Not because people stop being disappointed, but because disappointment stopped feeling like the end of the beginning. So how do we actually begin living that way? How do we stay deeply compassionate without quietly disappearing inside our relationships? How do we choose connection without making comfort our highest goal? Because I want to finish today's episode with one simple practice that has transformed the way I think about love, honesty, and belonging. It's not another communication strategy. It's simply a different way of living. Now imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing something had quietly changed. Someone can be disappointed with you and you don't immediately feel responsible for fixing it. Someone can disagree with you and you don't spend the rest of the day wondering if the relationship is falling apart. Someone can misunderstand your decision and somehow you remain deeply connected to yourself. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally stopped confusing someone else's emotional weather with your responsibility. That's emotional freedom. And that's where we've been heading all along. When we began this journey together, we thought we were talking about emotional reactions. Over the last several episodes, we discovered we were really talking about something much deeper. We talked about protecting ourselves, questioning the stories our minds create, learning that our worth isn't determined by how useful we are, trusting ourselves after difficult conversations. And today, we've discovered that the deepest freedom may simply be this: learning that belonging was never meant to be earned. It was meant to be received. I want to leave you with one practice. Not because it's complicated, because I believe it has the power to change the way you love the people closest to you. Next time you find yourself changing your answer, changing your plans, quietly abandoning your own needs because of someone else might be disappointed, I want you to pause, take one slow breath, and then ask yourself one question. What belongs to love and what belongs to fear? Now don't answer quickly, because those two voices often sound remarkably similar. Fear says keep them comfortable. Love says tell them the truth kindly. Fear says don't disappoint them. Love says trust the relationship enough to be honest. Fear protects approval, while love protects connection. And those are two very different lives. I've watched people transform entire marriages, not because they became better communicators, but because they stopped apologizing for telling the truth with kindness. Now think about that. Nothing dramatic changed. They simply stopped treating honesty like it's betrayal. They trusted something healthier, the truth. When spoken with humility, it creates stronger relationships than performance ever could. And that is secure love. Love is not measured by how little disappointment you create. It's measured by how much honesty it can safely hold. I think many of us have knowingly measured love by comfort. Healthy love measures itself very differently. Healthy love believes that relationship is strong enough to survive honest exchanges. The moment your worth no longer depends on keeping everyone happy, something remarkable begins happening. You stop negotiating away pieces of yourself. You stop editing your opinions before you even speak them. You stop apologizing simply because someone had an emotional reaction to something you said. You stop confusing another person's disappointment with your own failure. Not because you've become harder, but because you've become steadier. And that's another sign of emotional maturity. Healthy love trusts something anxious relationships rarely believe: that honesty creates stronger connection than performance ever could. Now think about that. Performance may create temporary approval, but honesty creates lasting trust. Performance says, I'll become whoever you need me to be, while love quietly says, I'll let you know who I really am. Only one of those relationships get to grow. Imagine how much of your life becomes available when you're no longer spending every conversation trying to prevent disappointment. Imagine the energy, the creativity, the rest, the peace. Imagine finally having enough emotional space to discover what brings you joy instead of spending all your energy managing everyone else's emotions. That's the life waiting on the other side of honesty. It's not a smaller one, it's a fuller one. I also want to give you something today that I wish more people had given me over the years. You have permission to let people experience disappointment. Not because you don't love them, but because healthy love believes they are strong enough to experience reality. Because disappointment isn't cruelty. Sometimes it's simply what honesty feels like before the trust has time to grow. And one day, someone you deeply love will be disappointed by one of your decisions. Your old identity will whisper, fix it, explain more, change your answer, make them feel better. But another voice, one that you've been strengthening through every episode we've shared together, will quietly say, stay calm, stay honest, stay present, trust the relationship, and trust yourself. And for the first time, you'll realize something remarkable. The relationship didn't break. It became more real. Because honesty didn't destroy the connection. It deepened it. The people who truly love you don't need you to be endlessly agreeable. They need you to be genuinely present. Presence is far more healing than performance. Truth is far more sustainable than pretending. Love is far stronger than perfection ever needed to be. So this week, practice one simple question. Whenever you feel yourself trying to manage someone else's emotional response, pause, take one slow breath, and simply ask, am I choosing love or am I choosing fear? And let that answer guide your next step. Not guilt, not performance, not the need to keep everyone comfortable, simply love. The kind of love that's strong enough to tell the truth and secure enough to remain connected afterwards. Now, if today's episode resonated with you, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to episodes 5 through 9 as one connected journey. Together, they tell a story about protection, interpretation, worth, trust, and belonging. More than a collection of topics, they're an invitation to become the kind of person you no longer has to earn love by abandoning themselves. And if you're ready to practice ideas beyond the podcast, visit pauseandrespond.com. Pick up one of the Pause and Respond workbooks, the book itself. Everything on there is designed to help you move from insight to daily practice, one relationship at a time. And if someone came to mind while you were listening today, share this episode with them, not because they need another lesson about boundaries, but because they may need permission to stop believing they have to perform, that it's okay to just belong. This is Pause and Respond. We're not trying to keep everyone happy. We're becoming the kind of people who can love honestly without losing themselves. Because the strongest relationships aren't built on comfort. They're built on courage. They're built on trust. They're built on people who know that honesty is not harm. Till next time, less reaction, more choices.